Good morning. I'm Pastor Josiah Black from First Baptist Church, Peru, and this is our ongoing Bible study of Micah. Welcome back. I hope that the intervening week has been kind to you. And today we're going to be looking at Micah chapter 5, verses 5 through 9. Micah chapter 5, verses 5 through 9. And here's how that goes. And he will be our peace when the Assyrians invade our land and march through our fortress. We will raise against them 7 shepherds, even 8 commanders, who will rule the land of Assyria with the sword, and the land of Nimrod with drawn sword. He will deliver us from the Assyrians when they invade our land and march across our borders. The remnant of Jacob will be in the midst of many people, like a dew from the Lord, like showers on the grass, which do not wait for anyone or depend on man. The remnant of Jacob will be among the nation, in the midst of many peoples, like a lion among the beasts of the forest, like a young lion among flocks of sheep, which mauls and mangles as it goes, and no one can rescue. Your hand will be lifted up in triumph over your enemies, and all your foes will be destroyed. This is the word of the Lord that we'll be looking at this morning, and probably already you're seeing some of the same themes we've seen through a lot of Micah. This passage concerns the fate of Judah, what's going to happen next, how it's going to happen, and there's really a lot here to kind of pick apart. So I want to start right at the top. Let's look at those first 2 verses again, Micah 5, verses 5 and 6. And he will be our peace when the Assyrians invade our land and march through our fortress. We will raise against them 7 shepherds, even 8 commanders, who will rule the land of Assyria with the sword, the land of Nimrod with drawn sword. He will deliver us from Assyrians when they invade our land and march across our borders. So, this follows almost immediately the passage that we looked at. Well, it does follow immediately. This follows the passage we looked at last week, where this ruler was predicted, someone who was going to kind of come and run things, and there was a sense of the messianic to that. We know it was a prediction that we see now in hindsight how it was fulfilled, but for the people of Israel at the time, they didn't know yet how it was going to come together. Okay, so what most scholars, at least the ones I've read, seem to think is that these verses 5 and 6 are Micah sort of repeating things he's heard in the air in Judah right now. And so it's this idea that this Messiah figure is going to show up and he's going to push out the Assyrians who are attacking right now. So there's a sense in these verses 5 and 6, that whoever Micah is sort of mimicking, so to speak, or whoever's argument he's repeating, they believe that this Messiah character is going to show up, is going to be this incredible military leader, and he's going to help them push the Assyrians, again, who are actively attacking right now. He's going to help them push them out, and they're going to essentially rule their own land again. We know, of course, that isn't what happened, and we know from other things Micah said that there was already a prophetic word spoken that said, hey, you are going to lose this. You're going to get carried away into exile. So we've got this potential here where, okay, if we read this as just another word from Micah to the people of Judah, then there's a sense that it's almost contradicting other statements he's made. But the idea here is actually that this is sort of a false argument that's in the air, is what most scholars think. The other possibility is that it's, again, a sort of forward-looking, prophetic down-the-line thing. But the way some of it's written, it makes it sound like it's happening in the here and now. So that's where the language kind of gets a little tricky, and it's easy to kind of lose the thread because of the way Micah presents his arguments and kind of goes from one thing to another, and we don't see the same cues in English that folks would see in Hebrew to understand sort of where the breaks are, what the directions are. But all that to say, the understanding we're going to settle on with this is that this is something Micah's hearing. This idea that the people of Judah think they're going to be delivered by this person that Micah has just described, but that's not necessarily the case. Which brings us to verses 7 and 8, which read, The remnant of Jacob will be in the midst of many people, like dew from the Lord, like showers on the grass, which do not wait for anyone or depend on man. The remnant of Jacob will be among the nations in the midst of many people, like a lion among the beasts of the forest, like a young lion among flocks of sheep, which mauls and mangles as it goes. So, a lot going on here, a lot of metaphor and things that can be kind of complicated to understand. I want to look at verse 7 first. So Micah again makes this statement, the remnant of Jacob. So he's talking about his audience right now. He's talking about the people of Judah. The remnant of Jacob will be in the midst of many people, like dew from the Lord, like showers on the grass, which do not wait for anyone or depend on man. So this is a very certain statement. This idea that, no, it's going to happen. And this metaphor of like dew from the Lord, like showers on the grass, which do not wait for anyone or depend on any man, that is probably intended to emphasize the inevitability of this. The in God's hands of this. Hey, it's going to happen. Just like the dew comes in the morning, and there's nothing we can do to affect that. This is going to happen. You will be in the midst of many people. You will be scattered from here. And there's nothing in your human will, no action that you can take that's going to change or fix that for you right now. So that's where we get that do language from. It's kind of a weird metaphor. It's not, and it's a tone shift from those last verses. But again, what Micah is trying to emphasize is, if you think this Messiah is coming now to save you from the Assyrians, you've got it wrong. You're going to get carried away. We've said that before. So the next verse, verse 8, the remnant of Jacob will be among the nations in the midst of many people. Again, hitting that point that you're going to get carried away. You'll be among the nations. You're going to be scattered among the people. But what's interesting is he does still emphasize that there'll be some strength to the people of Judah, even in their scattering. He refers to them like a lion among the beasts of the forest. Like a young lion among flocks of sheep, which mauls and mangles as it goes. And no one can rescue. So it kind of speaks to the power of Judah as being God's people, even when they're in the midst of these things. And he's not necessarily forecasting military victory here, but he's forecasting their sort of strength by contrasting them with the lion. He's trying to make the point, in all likelihood, that you're going to go and you're going to be among these people, but you are going to be distinct. You're still going to be the people of Judah, and it's not going to be the end if you get carried out of here. So that's kind of where we're at so far. We have these 4 verses. The first 2 seemingly present an incorrect view of what the people of Judah think is about to happen. And again, 7 and 8 serve as this kind of corrective. Micah straightening them out prophetically on here's what happens next. Now, verse 9 is really, really interesting. So it says, your hand will be lifted up in triumph over your enemies, and all your foes will be destroyed. So far in these passages, Micah has clearly been addressing the people of Judah. So what's really interesting in this is that our first reading, just kind of going along with where things have been discussed and sort of the direction of the text, we would assume that this is Micah talking to the people of Israel, or the people of Judah, letting them know, again, you eventually will have triumph and your foes will be destroyed. But something that so that's one possibility of what this means. But one of the commentaries that I read as I was preparing this study said that the particular structure of the verbs and the way that they're addressed in this particular verse seems to imply that Micah is actually making this statement about God. That he's saying that God's hand will be lifted in triumph over his enemies and all his foes will be destroyed. So if we go with that reading, it's this really powerful statement of, hey, Micah proclaiming to God, God, you're all powerful. Your hand will be lifted up in triumph over your enemies and all your foes will be destroyed. And so it becomes less about this someday military victory for Judah and instead focuses on the fact that at the end of the day, God is the one who holds all the power. It has nothing to do with these particular people, but it's God who is triumphant, who will be triumphant. It is the things of God that will triumph over the evil things in the world and that will ultimately liberate Judah. So, two possible readings there. Again, it could just be right along with what we've heard so far and an affirmation that Judah, someday you'll have military triumph. Or the reading that I like better and that I think there's a compelling case for is that Micah chooses to close this little thought with this proclamation of God's triumph and God's strength and God's power. So to me, that feels more like Micah. And it feels like an appropriate time with everything we've read so far to bring it back to this reality that God alone is all powerful. So I suppose rhetorically it makes sense too, but it could be either one. This is one of those things where it's kind of like, well, okay, could go either way. And I suppose that could be on purpose too, though I don't know Micah's mind and heart in this matter. It'd be a good question for him if you ever meet him someday. So, yeah. So that's our reading for today, verses 5 through 9 in Micah chapter 5. And again, we're just continuing to build on this idea of what's going to happen. And we see a false notion about what Messiah is going to be dismissed. And we see Micah again affirm the fate of Judah and what life's going to look like for them after Assyria invades. I do find it really interesting that they, in this era, in verses 5 and 6, have the same kind of misunderstanding that we'll see hundreds of years later in the Jewish people when Jesus shows up. Remember, because when Jesus showed up, because he didn't show up as this powerful military commander or this guy who was ready seemingly to seize the throne of David in that moment, they sort of dismissed the idea that he could be the Messiah or that he could be anyone special, because they were still hung up on this idea that kind of we see the genesis of it all the way back here in Micah 5 and 6, that it's going to be by military power. It's going to be by incredible might. 7 shepherds, 8 commanders. Both of those metaphors are intended to imply overwhelming military strength and control. So anyway, the roots for this prediction of Jesus were planted early as Micah 5, and we've got other places in Scripture even older than that. But this misunderstanding of what the Messiah is going to do when he arrives seems to start almost as early. It's this misunderstanding. So, it's interesting to understand and see where some of these ideas emerge and where we see them take root in the people of Israel and continue on. I think it begs the question, and maybe this will be one of the discussion questions today. What are we understanding? Where's our misunderstanding imperfect? And what are we kind of carrying with us in the way that the people of Israel carried this misunderstanding about Messiah? So maybe that's going to be one of our discussion questions for sure. Well, thank you for joining again in this study. Thank you for what I hope is good thought and good conversation from your end of this thing. And I really enjoy the opportunity to meet with you like this every week. If you've got questions, you know where to find me. And as always, I'll have a discussion question or two posted below. So please consider answering those and engaging in discussion on our Facebook page. Thank you. Talk to you soon.